Hello everyone, Peter Kanego here from Midship Cinema. Look what I got behind me.
Ohio from the first class social lounge of HIKAWA Maru. One of my favorite places in the world. The incredible painting behind me. And look at all this beauty. It's going to be very hard to leave this ship.
As a lifelong collector of all things ocean liner, I treasure my 3 lavishly illustrated glimpses of the East manuals, published by NYK Lines in its halcyon pre-war years. In the 1930-31 edition, it boasts of 150 vessels measuring 875,000 gross tons that link Japan with the rest of the world. It also announced a trio of mid-sized motorliners that would provide a fortnightly service between Japan, Hong Kong, Shanghai, the Philippines, Vancouver, and Seattle. These ships would provide an exceptionally high standard of accommodation and carry cargo as well. Taking their names from legendary Shinto shrines, the ships were to be named Hikawa, Hiei, and Heian Maru. Measuring 11,600 gross tons, the trio would carry 76 passengers in cabin or first class, 69 in tourist or third A, and 186 in a dormitory-style third B. They were powered by MAN, Burmeister, and Wayne diesels that produced a service speed of 17 knots, and the first 2 ships, Hikawa and Hiei Maru, were built in Yokohama at the Yokohama Dock Company Limited. The Hikawa Maru was laid down on November 9, 1928, and launched on September 30, 1929. Competing with the likes of Dollar Line and Canadian Pacific, these 3 NYK liners were initially very successful. In 1937, after the beginning of the Japan-Sino War, the routing was reduced to just Japan, Vancouver, and Seattle service. If the cabin class accommodation has a familiar look, it was by renowned designer Mark Simon, fresh from his palatial work for liners like Paris, Ile-de-France, and L'Atlantique, and soon the ultimate, the Normandy, albeit on a much smaller scale, of course. All cabins boasted a sink with running water, but in all but 3, the baths and toilets were down the hall. There was a lofty dome-centered cabin-class dining room that served European cuisine. Menu covers from the time depict Japanese imagery like Kigon Falls, cherry blossoms in Kyoto, and fireworks over the river Sumida. Multi-course dinners included hors d'oeuvres, soups, entrees like smoked ox tongue and milk-fed veal, basic salads, and desserts like marmalade raisin pudding. This sayonara menu offered prime rib and corn-fed turkey entrees, as well as a mince pie. On this voyage, there was even a tea hosted by Captain Kaneko, offering cakes and sandwiches. In addition to a lounge and smoking room, cabin class had its own nursery and, of course, a grand staircase. Tourist cabin, which was later called Third Class A, was situated aft with its own lounge, smoking room, and dining room, as well as small cabins with upper and lower accommodations. Cuisine in tourist cabin was basically Western, and typical menus were bilingual, with offerings like grilled ox kidney on toast for breakfast and braised lamb for dinner, with daily Japanese selections as well. Located forward, Third Class B had its own lounge, smoking room, and dining room with Japanese cuisine and dormitory-style accommodation. NYK issued a beautiful series of postcards for each ship, and because they were mail ships, you can still find Imperial Japanese Sea Post cancellations on letters from that era. Probably because she was the first in the class, HIKAWA MARU was the most photographed of the three liners. She also carried some prominent passengers like Prince and Princess Chichibu, Jigoro Kano, the founder of Kodokan Judo, and Charlie Chaplin, who crossed on a world tour in 1932. Having just completed City Lights, Chaplin was at the height of his fame. Later, Hikawa and her sisters would help expatriate hundreds of Jewish refugees who escaped via Vladivostok from Nazi persecution. At the start of World War II, HIKAWA MARU was re-registered as an auxiliary transport and later a submarine tender. She was sunk near Truk Lagoon on November 17, 1943. The HIKAWA MARU was also requisitioned as an auxiliary submarine tender in 1941 and sunk at Truk Lagoon on February 18, 1944, where she remains as its largest and most popular dive site. Fortunately, a much better fate lay in store for HIKAWA MARU, which became an auxiliary hospital ship in 1941. She would transport over 30,000 sick and wounded Japanese soldiers on 24 voyages back to the mainland from places like Rabaul, Manila, Jakarta, and Saipan. Her captains notably refused orders to carry munitions, which is probably why she still exists, and she managed to escape major damage despite encountering mines on 3 occasions. One of only 2 Japanese liners to survive the war, the U.S. government used her until 1947 to transport demobilized soldiers. She was then returned to NYK, who at first used her as a freighter before placing her back on the Seattle run in 1953. HIKAWA MARU remained largely as built, albeit with some new furnishings and soft fittings. With stiff competition from American President Line's stylish and modern ships, she quietly eked out her post-war service and was never replaced. A deck was dedicated entirely to cabin or first class, beginning with the glass-enclosed promenade and the cabin class lounge, where a new piano replaced the original, which was thrown overboard by Japanese soldiers during the war. Directly aft on the port side was the reading room, followed by the reception hall, and on either side, the ship's finest staterooms. For the most part, this deck remains unchanged to this day, all the way back to the cabin class smoking room. On B deck, there was a combination of third class A and B and cabin class spaces and accommodations. After a block of third class B spaces, the cabin class dining saloon and nursery were followed by cabin accommodations and, near the stern, the third A smoking room and lounge. C deck began with third class B accommodations, followed by crew space, and then third class A spaces. In affordable third class A, the dining room, which is apparently now gutted, was a pleasantly decorated space. After 254 voyages, and with over 25,000 passengers carried, HIKAWA MARU's retirement was announced in 1960. Fortunately, her history was appreciated by the Japanese people, and instead of being sent off to the shipbreakers, she went to Yokohama's Mitsubishi Dry Dock No. 1 for a 10 million yen conversion. For her new role as a youth hostel and museum, the propellers and many furnishings were removed, and some of her hatches were plated over, but aside from a new green-hulled paint scheme, little else was changed. In 1973, the hostel was closed, and for a short time she was painted blue-gray before being returned to her original black-hulled NYK livery that she proudly wears today. I made my first pilgrimages to the ship in late 1995 and early 1996, and in the following footage, you'll see some things that have changed between then and now. I'd love to hear what you think about those changes in the comments section. Even then, there was some concern that due to a bureaucratic technicality, the HIKAWA MARU, since designated a building and not a ship, couldn't be dry docked. At that time, it had been 35 years since her last dry docking. After purchasing a ticket in the booth outside, visitors boarded via a staircase that led to a long ramp on her bow that fed into the ship via the A-deck promenade. The ramp is now gone, but sadly, so is the bow access. There was a beer garden and a play area on aft A-deck, which visitors can now only access on the weekends. The midships upper deck areas, which are now closed off, were also accessible. My first visit was pretty much dedicated to the outer deck areas and was frustratingly brief, but we would soon return. At that time, you could ride a ferry between the ship and the main Yokohama train station. Even then, to see this beautifully preserved ocean liner was a long-sought dream come true. We returned a couple weeks later with a little more time to finish the documentation. Back then, traditional Japanese music played throughout her interior spaces. Of course, that was the noon whistle. There was a bell on her port wing, and here you have a good view of that since removed ramp. On the captain's cabin deck, you could access the cabin itself via open portals, but today you need to peer through the windows to see inside. That strange motion-activated talking mannequin in the bedroom, which looked like it may have had a few drinks, is also now long gone. On that early January visit, the beer garden was bustling with vendors and a giant demure-looking Godzilla. There was also a popular cafe and restaurant carved out of former crew space called the Cafe Cabin, where visitors could purchase snacks and beverages. Although it's long since closed, it's still there today. Cafe Cabin's forward section looked a little bit more formal and was probably used for banquets and catering. On forward A deck, the ship's most spectacular room, the cabin class lounge, was locked up but at least brightly lit, only visible through the big brass windows on the promenade and the aft starboard doorway. On one hand, I was so grateful and thrilled it still exists, but on the other, it was so frustrating to see its Art Deco splendor stuffed and mounted, and otherwise lifeless. Likewise, the reading room is only visible through its aft portal. In the cabin class vestibule, a latter-day faux deco chandelier incongruously hung over that grand staircase that once proudly crossed the Pacific. Just a few steps away, the cabin class dining saloon was dimly lit and partially set up for some sort of banquet or function. At that time, there was still a working galley on board. The soft fittings were a little worn and of the wrong era, and a pair of 1960s Fairmont Hotel-style crystal chandeliers were completely out of place, but even so, it was another still grand space, just in need of some TLC. The adjacent nursery was then more like a waiting room and missing its nursery fittings, but at least those metal frames of the spectacular ceiling lights remained. In the cabin class smoking room, there were some vintage ocean liner posters on display, and the chairs have since been replaced. On aft B deck, in what is now the ticket booth and entrance hall, there was an auditorium space called the Blue Light Hall. Directly aft, and sadly now off limits, were the third Class A smoking room and lounge. It would be so nice if these rooms and the sheltered deck space farther aft, which was then being used as a pinball and pachinko parlor, as well as a youth activity space called the Captain's Club, could be accessed once again. And last, but certainly not least, the beautifully preserved engine room, with its still original Burmeister and Wayne diesels, had a recurring sound and light show simulating an enemy attack, rather ironically, considering the fate of HIKAWA Maru's two sisters. And yes, despite all of my nitpicking, just to be able to see and walk the decks of this ship was sheer bliss. Even with a benign Godzilla on her stern, the HIKAWA Maru looked magnificent from all angles. Even back then, there were no guarantees we'd ever get to see this ship again, so it was with misty eyes that we rode the ferry back to Yokohama's train depot. And as it turned out, her owners were unable to keep up with the necessary repairs, and HIKAWA Maru was shut down in 2006. Heroically, NYK Line, now one of the world's biggest container shipping companies, took on the work and lovingly restored her, reopening her to the public again as NYK HIKAWA Maru on April 25, 2008. Very long overdue, we made our return to Yokohama in June of 2024, and like our initial pilgrimage in the 90s, paid her 2 visits in order to capture every detail. My requests to interview her new management were declined, probably because they knew I might broach the elephant in the room, her desperate need for a dry docking, but thankfully it looks like that is now being addressed. Since 2024, NYK has quietly been conducting structural surveys on the ship, and in January 2026, they announced plans to make any necessary repairs to HIKAWA Maru and the waterfront around her to keep her with us for many more years. And let's face it, these have been tough times for those of us who love classic ocean liners. The little 1955 German-built Aurora partially sank and was scrapped last year. The SS United States, the fastest ocean liner and America's largest, is about to be sunk as a diving attraction off Florida, and the former Stockholm of 1948, the ship that collided with the Andrea Doria in 1956, is being slowly cut up in Belgium. That leaves us with the QE2, which is sadly roasting and empty at Dubai, the mid-century magnificent Rotterdam in Rotterdam, and the enduring Queen Mary in Long Beach to carry the torch with HIKAWA Maru. Oh, and for those planning a visit, don't hesitate, but also keep in mind the ship is closed on Mondays, and the aft deck access is only possible on weekends. Remarkably, admission is a mere 300 yen, or just $2, and there are reduced rates for seniors and students. So let's go aboard and see what she looks like today, starting at the top with bridge deck. The first thing I noticed upon returning to the ship is how her paint and woodwork glistens and how beautiful her teak decking looks. And while I really do miss the bow access, the foredecks look so much better without that big ramp. Her impeccable, partially enclosed bridge wings have a noticeable outward dip or camber, and the views both fore and aft are purely inspirational for those of us who worship at the altar of ocean liners. The aft terrace on bridge deck is ideal to catch the noon whistle in its full glory, along with the pre-recorded warning announcement in both Japanese and English.
Visitors touring the wheelhouse, captain's office, or anywhere near the funnel are asked to be aware of the loud noise.
I think all of Yokohama, and maybe even parts of Tokyo, heard that. As for the wheelhouse, it's one of the best preserved on any ship afloat, with its vintage equipment looking ready to depart on the next voyage to Seattle. This space took quite a while to film between the rushes of visitors, many of whom lingered to turn her wheel for selfies and a chance to type out SOS on the wireless. So while they did that and so much more, I got close-ups of the myriad details, including the brass gauges over the windows, the fire and watertight door panels, and the fuse box. There's a big, beautiful Sperry gyro compass, and for continued safe passage, a lovely Shinto shrine. It really is hard to believe that after no less than 95 years, it's all so well maintained and original, and surely part of the reason HIKAWA MARU was designated an important cultural property in 2016 by Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Sciences, and Technology. Heading down to what is now called Captain's Office deck, there's more of that scrubbed teak and the first of no less than 3 descending glass-enclosed terraces overlooking the bow. While the mannequin is now gone and you can no longer access the cabin itself, you can see most of its gloriously paneled interiors through the windows on either side and forward. Just beyond the forward housing, there's a hold deck, and then this level continues past the ship's mighty funnel and some wonderful engine room skylights and ventilators to a terrace overlooking the stern. Alas, this once popular deck area is now off limits, but remains well maintained and will hopefully be accessible again in the future. Today, only the forward portion of boat deck remains accessible to visitors. Like Captain's Office deck above and A deck below, it has a glass-enclosed observation terrace. It's also where the builder's plate was mounted. The interior, now largely gutted, contained officers' quarters. These days, visitors' access is limited to the hold area and just a bit of the starboard promenade under the lifeboats. Just beyond, in the midships deck house, the framework of the Cafe Cabin restaurant awaits its next phase. Hopefully, at least the cafe will reopen someday, allowing visitors a chance to relax and linger a bit during their self-guided tours. A staircase off the starboard promenade leads down to A deck, but first, let's finish this level with a look at the terrace overlooking the stern, and then the aft steering platform. Again, this entire portion of the ship is only open to visitors on the weekends. One would hope that one day, the beer garden and vendors will return and bring it all back to life. As mentioned earlier, A deck was devoted entirely to first or cabin class, and is where most of this ship's decorative treasures are waiting to be discovered. But first, I accidentally found myself on the now off-limits bow area, wishing it was still part of the tour. For me, it offers a wonderful vantage of the imposing forward superstructure, but for most, it would provide an essential Jack and Rose photo op. The glories of A deck begin inside that forward superstructure with that gorgeous glass-enclosed promenade with its brass-framed windows, riveted framework, and cambered teak. And these days, while you can still peek in at the cabin class lounge through those brass windows, it's a much better view looking outside from within. It seems ironic and a little strange that the only ship still afloat with ties to the legendary Normandy, Ile-de-France, and l'Atlantique awaits in Yokohama. Of course, the scale is much smaller, but the elements and detailing in HIKAWA MARU's cabin class are unmistakably Marc Simon's French Art Deco style. It is interesting that NYK chose to go with the Western look for their ships, and their appeal to attract American, Canadian, and European passengers. Exquisitely carved glowing maple paneling, etched glass, beveled cornices, brass windows, and cast iron doors are all part of the Lost Ocean Liner canon. Situated under the dome, a tropically themed oil-on-board painting by L.R. Delouage is the room's centerpiece, a remarkable survivor of the ship's passenger and war service. By restoring this space and then opening it up to visitors, NYK has given all of us a rare gift. If you visit the ship, allow extra time just to sit here and take it all in. Let your mind wander, reflect, and imagine what it was like to cross in a liner like this and all the others that are now long gone. Through that cast iron door on the aft port side, there's a bird's eye maple paneled vestibule providing direct access to the promenade and the reading room, another space that was sealed off until NYK refurbished the ship in 2008. Meanwhile, on the starboard side, that other cast iron door opens onto a passageway that leads aft to the first or cabin class reception hall. Again, it's such a visual treat to just pause here and take in all the details, from the sconces to the banister and the beveled panels. Many of the smaller French post-war colonial ships, like Messageries Maritimes Tahitiennes, which last sailed as the Atalante, had staircases like this. And yes, Tahitien was also designed by Marc Simon, or rather, Simon. Continuing aft on the port side, you'll see HIKAWA MARU's first or cabin class staterooms, beginning with Suite 104 and 102, which when combined had a private bath with tub. The exquisitely paneled 104 had a bedroom and a small dining nook, a gorgeous chandelier, and presumably for privacy from looky-loos on the promenade, stained glass windows. The bathroom was situated between both staterooms, and when they were booked separately, accessible to the other cabin class passengers. Stateroom 102 is shown as it looked when combined with 104 in a dining room configuration. This is, of course, where Charlie Chaplin and other notables resided. One wonders if small crowds lurked outside just to get a glimpse of one of the world's biggest stars, or if he just blended in with fellow passengers. Continuing aft, you'll find all the preserved, even-numbered cabin-class staterooms. All had at least one window, an en-suite sink with hot and cold water, and a chair and table. Aside from 104, and on the starboard side, 107 and 109, which have long since been gutted, all cabin-class staterooms lacked private facilities. There were separate men's and ladies' lavatories and a bathing room off the inboard passage. If you count 102 and 104 separately, there are 9 preserved cabin-class staterooms on NYK HIKAWA Maru. All of the starboard side staterooms were eventually removed and replaced with an exhibit called Voyage to Seattle, which recreates a 9-day Pacific crossing utilizing displays and artifacts recalling life on board. Here you'll find an assortment of vintage NYK advertising photos, a wooden wheel, a deck chair, a bundle of raw silk, which is one of the ship's main cargoes, navigation lights, and much, much more. Both port and starboard side passages lead to the aft cabin class foyer. The space lacks the grandeur of the forward foyer, presumably because it eventually leads down to the third class A zone on C deck. The cabin class portion of A deck ends with an elegant touch, Marc Simon's cozy yet lofty cabin class smoking room. Another salon with a skylight top dome in its center. It's been spruced up since my last visit with new carpeting and leather armchairs that, along with the bank seating alcoves, invite you to come in and stay a while. The original bar in its forward starboard corner is long since gone, but there is a small service counter in its place. Brochures from the time emphasize this room as a men's lair versus the more feminine lounge. Either way, it's a joy to spend time in its walnut-paneled realm, imagining the glow of the artificially lit marble and alabaster fireplace and the muffled banter amid clouds of cigar, pipe, and cigarette smoke. The doors on the aft end originally led out to open deck. And again, like the lounge, it's nicer to look outside from within, although the reverse view isn't bad at all. In this part of the ship, the A-deck promenades are sheltered versus being glass enclosed and lead to the large open deck aft. And aside from these vending machines on the port side, there is no food or drink available on board. As mentioned earlier, the cargo holds were welded over to create large open deck areas that once again are only accessible on the weekends. Near the aft deck house, a pair of stairs lead down to the sheltered B-deck space that was originally third class A promenade and later the pinball arcade. A-deck culminates aft of the emergency steering station platform with a terrace that overlooks the mooring area on B-deck, another part of the ship that's no longer accessible to visitors. B-deck has a combination of cargo, crew, and passenger areas in all 3 classes. During my accidental visit to the bow area, I found myself on the now off-limits forward B-deck by the crew areas, the forward hold, and the former third B spaces. Just inside that towering superstructure I was pleasantly surprised to find the framework of the former 3rd B smoking room and lounge still intact, along with portions of a dormitory on the port side. On the starboard side, a passage led to the remnants of the men's lavatory. For contrast with the cabin class spaces, it would be so nice to see these modest areas restored at some point. And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. For today's HIKAWA Maru visitors, B Deck begins with Marc Simon Finery in the third of his domed spaces, the cabin class dining saloon. In the 2008 restoration, NYK got rid of those tacky chandeliers and installed backlit glass panels in the ceiling, added period-style carpeting, more authentic furnishings, and cordoned off sections of the room with tables set with vintage NYK menus, silver, and cutlery. This is another period space that invites you to stay a while, perhaps even take a seat, take it all in, and let your imagination soar. Whether heading into or out of the dining saloon, you can't avoid an encounter with the lower level of HIKAWA Maru's grand staircase. And why would you? Again, with the soupçon of Ile-de-France flourish, but on a classic Combeliner scale, it's another glorious portal to the ship's Art Deco origins, and part of the reason HIKAWA Maru was nicknamed the Queen of the Pacific, and is today an important cultural property. And now a more period-accurate chandelier looms over the stairs, thanks to NYK's dedicated preservation efforts. Nearby on the port side, at the dining saloon entrance, the cabin class nursery has also been carefully restored. Farther aft, in what was originally a hold area and a sheltered promenade, and later the blue light hall, you'll find the ticket counter and a display area. This is where the builder's plate is displayed and is actually now where you board the ship. Once again, NYK has done a fantastic job, but hopefully one day the Tourist Day smoking room, lounge, and sheltered deck space a bit farther aft will also be reopened. C Deck, which was originally dedicated to crew and third-class accommodations, now contains museum exhibits and a pair of third-class cabins. On the port side, there are 2 dormitory-style third-class B cabins on display, showing what it was like for immigrants crossing the Pacific in search of a better life. And of course, those who didn't have the budget to cross in cabin class. Also on the port side and carved out of crew space, there's a wonderful model gallery with Japanese and even some foreign ships from different eras, including the HIKAWA Maru as a hospital ship. On the starboard side of C Deck, there's an excellent exhibit illustrating HIKAWA Maru's history, from liner to war service and back again, and even her time as a hostel. And by the exit, you'll find a fantastic cutaway of the ship. Oh, but wait, there's still more to see. You can actually enter the engine room on C Deck, but most of the machinery space is laid out on D and E decks. There's a lofty view all the way up to the skylights, and numerous informative displays describing the pair of Burmeister and Wayne diesels that powered this twin-screw ship at a maximum speed of 18.2 knots, or almost 21 miles per hour. Hikawa was fast in her day, but it was Hiei that was the fastest of the trio, with a top speed of 18.5 knots. Here's the main electrical panel, looking spotless and ready to power the ship, and down on the bottom level, you can get very close to the gear while standing beneath the twin shafts. Here's a look at one of the throttle control panels, and a last look around this beautifully preserved space. Thank you for sticking with me on this detailed top-to-bottom tour of one of the best preserved ships in the world. After a wonder-filled day, we'll exit into the night and have much to reflect upon. I'd also like to offer heartfelt thanks to NYK HIKAWA Maru's saviors, NYK Line, and to the ship's dedicated staff of caregivers, and wish them all the best as they continue to preserve her for future generations. I'd also like to thank Don Leavitt at Nautiques.com and Wayne Yonda for their help. And I hate to have to ask, but if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment if you have time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for visiting NYK HIKAWA Maru today.
And just one more thing. If you collect ocean liner ephemera, go to Nautiques.com for a trusted source. And if you love ships, consider joining the Steamship Historical Society of America at sshsa.org.